Okay, again, so yeah, thank you for everyone for taking some time to come and learn about the Floodplain Resilience Project. Like I said, my name is Jeff Cottle. I'm the project manager of the Floodplain Resilience Plan. On the screen here is our agenda for today. We'll just go through basically some goals of the open house, this virtual open house, and then give a little bit of background and talk about our specific proposals, and hopefully have a good amount of time for questions. So we're here today because we recently released a discussion draft of the plan and sent out letters to anyone who lives or owns property in the area. I suspect that many of you received a letter. This virtual open house is our kickoff to the public engagement phase of the project, which will continue until the end of January. Throughout that time, city staff will be available for questions and will help you understand how the proposed changes may impact you if you do own property in our project area. I wanted to highlight the goals of this virtual open house. We'll provide some background, cities, floodplains, and their management, review the key proposals, and then have an opportunity to ask questions. Like I said, if you would like to submit questions in the chat, feel free while we go through, and then take some breaks to address them as they come up. So first, let's start with a little background information to set the table for the discussion of our specific proposal in the plan. So this map here shows the 6 waterways within the city and their associated floodplains that are addressed in the plan. So this specific map shows what we are calling the combined flood hazard area. The combined flood hazard area is the combination of the FEMA 100-year floodplain and the 1996 flood inundation area, and I'll give you a little bit more detail in a sec. These different waterways, as if you're familiar with Portland, they have their own kind of floodplain characteristics, and then also the nearby development types vary depending on where you are in the city. There's approximately 6,500 acres in the combined flood hazard area, and that includes over 3,800 tax lots that actually have floodplain. As I said, the combined flood hazard area is a combination of the FEMA 100-year floodplain, which people are generally most familiar with, and that is based on a FEMA model that identifies areas along rivers and streams that are estimated to have a 1% chance of flooding in any given year. For context, over the course of a 30-year mortgage, a house in the 100-year floodplain has a 26% chance or greater chance of flooding at least once. The 1996 flood inundation area is the actual area that was underwater based on aerial photos taken the morning after the February 1996 flood. Most of this extent is required to be regulated by Metro, Portland's regional government, through its Title III, which is the title of that. The name of that title is Water Quality and Flood Management. So FEMA provides flood insurance to property owners within the 100-year floodplain if their community participates in the National Flood Insurance Program, which is also often referred to as the NFIP. So NFIP communities must implement minimum floodplain development requirements, including building and site development standards, and be compliant with applicable federal laws, including the Endangered Species Act. NFIP communities may implement additional voluntary approaches to exceed the minimum development requirements. These additional actions contribute to the community's rating in FEMA's community rating system program. Portlanders currently receive a 25% discount on their insurance premium as a result of the city's rating. So in 2016, there was a biological opinion that was released by the National Marine Fisheries Service. This process started with a lawsuit in 2009 brought by a handful of environmental organizations. In 2016, the biological opinion was released, and that biological opinion concluded that the National Flood Insurance Program jeopardizes 16 salmon and steelhead species by increasing floodplain development and consequently reducing floodplain habitat for those species. So a biological opinion compiles information on relevant endangered and threatened species and provides an opinion on whether a federal action is likely to impact the continued existence of those species or their critical habitat. Since the release of the biological opinion in 2016, city staff have been meeting periodically with FEMA to understand the potential changes to the NFIP and to review our proposed approaches with them. In October, just last month, FEMA released an implementation plan that described how they expect to meet the directives of the biological opinion. The implementation plan will now be reviewed in accordance with the National Environmental Policy Act, also often referred to as NEPA, and updates will be made prior to its finalization. The recommendations that we have that are included in this plan draw on both the original biological opinion and the draft guidance that is in the implementation plan that was released last month. So this map shows, so overall there are 13 threatened and endangered species that utilize or may utilize Portland's waterways. This map shows 7 of those species. Each color represents one of the 7 species. And so this is the reason you can see these are all of these, a collection of species is located in all of those watersheds that we addressed earlier in the combined flood hazard area. And this is really just the reasoning for why we are required to make these changes in the areas that we'll discuss today. So the city, as I said, the city has been preparing for the implementation of the biological opinion since its release in 2016. So as a part of that preparation in September of 2019, the directors of many of the city's bureaus who are responsible for planning and development agreed to a floodplain management update work plan that laid out the various regulatory steps needed to comply with the biological opinion. These steps were broken into 3 phases. Phase 1, which was completed in December of 2020, was the incorporation of floodplain requirements into the river plan South Reach. And so right now, those requirements are in place in the South Reach, which the South Reach of the Willamette is essentially from Ross Island Bridge down to the city boundary, and then also includes some of the unincorporated county down there. Phase 2, which is this phase, this is the floodplain resilience plan, is phase 2, which we'll go over the specifics of here in a moment. And then phase 3 will include future projects focused on specific areas within the city, including the Willamette North Reach, Willamette River North Reach. So we expect to do a river plan North Reach, similar to what we did in the South Reach. Industrial lands in the Columbia River corridor, and then also Johnson Creek. Each of these areas have unique characteristics and in some cases regulatory structures that really warrant a more tailored approach. So now to go on to our specific proposals that are part of this phase of the project, the Floodplain Resilience Plan. The goals of the plan are threefold. So first, the aim is to ensure Portlanders will have continued access to FEMA's National Flood Insurance Program, as well as disaster relief funds. Second, we want to reduce future flood risk for people living and working in the floodplain. We recognize that as we're starting to see more and more of the results of climate change, that flood risk is likely to increase, and that areas prone to flooding will expand, and that there will be some shifts in how the amount and the timing of our precipitation. So we're really focused on preparing for those changes and ensuring that through our regulations that we are addressing those issues. And then finally, we're looking to improve habitat for endangered and threatened species and contribute to their overall recovery. The city has long had a commitment to that recovery for salmon and steelhead, and this is just another piece of that overall effort. So the plan components, first piece is we are updating the zoning code, a number of different places in the zoning code to address habitat impacts. Additionally, we are updating the building code, and the updates to the building code are really focused more on maintaining flood storage, so ensuring that when development, if development happens in the floodplain, that adequate capacity for floodwaters to be continue to be transmitted in the waterway, or there, so that that flood storage is maintained. And then finally, support the city's efforts to related to mitigation and restoration within the floodplain. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So just a little bit on terminology that we'll be talking about today. So the graphic provides an illustration of the high hazard, the riparian buffer, and the combined flood hazard area. We already talked about what is included in the combined flood hazard area, which is the 1996 and the FEMA 100-year floodplain. Those two areas are both included. The high hazard area is the area closest to the waterway and includes what is called the floodway and the 10-year flood interval. So the floodway is designated by FEMA, and it's the estimated area that will accommodate that 100-year storm. The 10-year flood interval has a 10% chance of flooding any given year. So the high hazard area is really very close to the rivers and streams, the area directly adjacent to rivers and streams. The riparian buffer area, which is a concept that was presented in the biological opinion, includes all floodplain within 170 feet of a waterway, or more technically, the ordinary high water mark. And so basically, from ordinary high all the way out 170 feet is riparian buffer. If the floodplain does not extend all the way to 170 feet, the riparian buffer ends at the boundary of the floodplain. So going into the specific proposals, and like I said, we are updating different parts of the zoning code, and those different portions of the zoning code apply to different areas. So it's really a area specific discussion here for the different changes. So in the Willamette River Central Reach, the first proposal is to apply the river environmental overlay zone to all Willamette River floodplains, so both developed and undeveloped. And then a second significant proposal is the adoption of a riparian buffer area similar to what has already been adopted in the South Reach of the Willamette. So that's in existence in the South Reach. In the riparian buffer area, proposed development must mitigate impacts to floodplain habitat and then also demonstrate improvement of at least one of 3 identified floodplain functions. And so that would be demonstrated through a land use review and through actions that the applicant would be taking as a part of the project. This slide shows a map of where we are proposing to expand the river environmental overlay zone. So if you see here, the light green are all areas where we are proposing the expansion. And so as you can tell, the expansion is largely focused on in the central east side, starting at the Burnside Bridgehead and running down into the sort of the heart of the central east side. And then there's another larger area of expansion in the northern portion of the Pearl District. So both of these areas were flooded in 1996, and that is why that we are proposing to apply the river environmental there. The river environmental overlay ensures that development impacts in these areas are mitigated and that floodplain habitat is preserved where it does already exist. For developed tax lots, this change will have little effect except for some updates to when trees and vegetation can be removed or removed without going through a city process, and what is needed to replace them, more specifically how many trees need to be replaced if a tree is removed. So moving a little further south to the South Waterfront. So the South Waterfront is regulated as a part of the Central City Plan District. So it is not subject to the river overlay zone, which where the river environmental lives. This is its own part of the Central City Plan District. So we are proposing some changes within the existing structure of that code section of the Central City Plan District. As a part of those updates, we are proposing a new tree and vegetation requirement in South Waterfront. Specifically, we're proposing to add a new tree replacement standard for the properties that have the Greenway Overlay Zone, which is in the South Waterfront. The Greenway Overlay Zone is applied to properties along the waterfront. And so right now there is no standard for tree replacement. There you would you would utilize our Title 11, which is specifically the tree code. But in this case, we are updating the tree and vegetation requirements to be more consistent with those requirements to the north in the Central Reach and to the south in the South Reach as a part of those are both related to the river environmental requirements. Additionally, we're making some minor updates to the exterior lighting standards in the Greenway Overlay Zone. These changes basically, again, are looking, there's only a few additions, and basically it's, again, we're aiming to be more consistent with the requirements both in the Central Reach and the South Reach. So moving beyond, so that was the Willamette River. Now we are also proposing updates to the environmental overlay zone, which basically the environmental overlay zone is applied everywhere else in the city, both for flood hazards and waterways, but also other natural resources throughout the city. In the Columbia Corridor, the environmental conservation overlay zone is proposed to be applied to both undeveloped and developed floodplains that are not in where the environmental overlay zone is not already applied, and in areas that are not in 3 industrial zones. So the heavy industrial, the general industrial 2, and the general employment 2 zone. These changes will not go into effect right now as a part of this phase of the project. Application of those changes to these industrial zones will be are really currently being evaluated as a part of the economic opportunities analysis update, which has been started and is a part of our process to comply with a different statewide planning goal 9, which is really focused on economic development. So it's expected that the similar changes to what we're proposing for the other zones would go into effect for the industrial zones once the economic opportunities analysis is adopted. So in the environmental overlay zone, the updates to that section of the code are similar to those that we've discussed elsewhere. It's really updates specifically for tree and vegetation management, so replacement and pruning, et cetera, but only in the combined flood hazard area. So we are, the changes that we are making would not affect development in the environmental overlay zone elsewhere in the city. It's really specifically focused to those properties that have floodplain and really the changes manage trees and vegetation within the combined flood hazard area. So this map shows you in the kind of purple pink color the location of the changes that where we are proposing to expand the environmental conservation overlay zone in the Columbia Corridor. You can see it sort of, and again, this does not include the industrial, those 3 industrial zones. So similarly, we're making changes in the Fano and Tryon Creek, which is down in southwest Portland, or the Fano and Tryon Creek watersheds. Similar to what we talked about the Columbia Corridor, the conservation overlay zone will be expanded to be applied on both undeveloped and developed floodplains where the environmental overlay zones are not currently applied. And then the same updates to the tree and vegetation replacement requirements will apply to these floodplains in the Fano and Tryon Creek. Again, these changes that are in the environment, that are proposed for the environmental zone, environmental overlay zones would not really have much of an impact on already developed properties. In cases where new development, significant expansions, or full redevelopment is proposed in the floodplain, new requirements would need to be met. But if you're already already developed on your property and you're newly applied, the environmental overlay zone is newly applied, you wouldn't see much difference. So here's a map of where we are proposing to expand the environmental conservation overlay zone in Fano Creek. A good amount of this expansion is an existing developed floodplain. And then similarly, and it's in the kind of pink purplish color again. So this map shows the little bit of area that we are proposing for an expansion around in the Tryon Creek floodplain. As you can see, most of the Tryon Creek floodplain is already in the environmental overlay zone. Just a little note that the floodplain in Fano and Tryon Creek is only the FEMA 100-year floodplain. The 1996 flood inundation area was not mapped on around these two creeks as a part of the Metro Title III. So a final change we wanted to highlight is related to updates to the building code. So currently within the FEMA 100-year floodplain of 1996 flood inundation area, the code requires that any placement of fill be offset by an equal amount of excavation in the floodplain. So the required excavation ensures the floodwaters are not displaced as a result of the new development. So that same amount of flood storage is maintained after the development is complete. This requirement ensures that basically reduces flood risk for the new property, the new project that is completed, and also others downstream of that property. So our plan proposes to increase the volume of excavation that is required to offset placement of fill, as well as structures. So one of the things that will change is currently placement of structures does not require a compensating excavation. We are adding the requirement that if you place either fill or structures into the floodplain, you will have to offset and mitigate that impact. So the proposal is in the high hazard area, as we talked about, those areas very close to rivers and streams, the required ratio of excavation to fill or structure, the volume that you would need to excavate is 2 times that of the fill or structure. And that's just area below the flood elevation. Similarly, for the undeveloped floodplain or the riparian buffer area where it is mapped, the ratio would be 1.5 to 1. So again, the volume that we would need to excavate would be 1.5 times the amount of fill or structure you're placing in the floodplain. So there are some exceptions to these new excavation requirements. Balance cut fill, or a 1-to-1 ratio, similar to what already exists, will continue to be required in the Willamette River North Reach and in the 3 industrial zones I mentioned before. Again, those are the reasoning for that is related to ensuring the completion of our economic opportunities analysis and ensuring adequate capacity for industrial lands moving forward. Balance cut fill will also continue to be required for lands within the drainage districts. And so finally, Johnson Creek, just a note, Johnson Creek has its own excavation requirements, specifically in the building code in the flood hazards chapter. And those excavation requirements will be evaluated as a part of the future Johnson Creek project that we talked about as part of phase 3. In general, we are not making significant changes we're making no changes in Johnson Creek, except in those areas where the environmental overlay zone is already applied. So we wanted to highlight a couple of related projects, especially, most importantly, the Army Corps, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers modeling effort. So right now, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is developing a model, an updated model of the lower Willamette River and Columbia Slough. So the model will be used to estimate the FEMA 100-year flood using current topography, current hydrology, water, and how much we would expect to come down in the Willamette River, river bathymetry, and development patterns. So that estimated FEMA 100-year floodplain, the city will be advocating for FEMA to use that model, the results of that model, to update the FEMA 100-year floodplain. That process is expected, the FEMA process is expected to take 3 to 5 years. But we want to get that started as soon as possible to, again, make sure that we are taking into account the most accurate data on flood risk along the Willamette in this case. In the interim, before we have an official 100-year floodplain from FEMA, we also plan to use the Army Corps model to develop a more up-to-date estimate of the 1996 flood inundation area. And so taking into account those current conditions I discussed. So as a part of that, we'll work with Metro to incorporate the new estimate of the 1996 flood into our Title III map, the city's Title III map. That update will provide a more accurate estimate of the flood risk associated with a future storm similar to the one that was experienced in 1996. So a second related project is that the Bureau of Environmental Services has been evaluating, and we're working with the Bureau of Environmental Services on this project consistently. But so the Bureau of Environmental Services has been evaluating options for supporting or establishing mitigation banks that can be used as an alternative to on-site mitigation. So mitigation banks have a lot of value because they allow for larger areas of mitigation, and you can get, which those larger areas have been shown to provide greater habitat benefits. So in addition to habitat mitigation credits, we would also hope that there will be the availability of flood storage mitigation credits as a part of this mitigation program. The sort of logistics and getting and finding locations and finding resources for these mitigation bank is still a work in progress, but that is something that will help us give options for development that needs to be in the floodplain and may not be able to provide either the capacity or adequate habitat on site. The Bureau of Environmental Services is also working to identify high value resource restoration sites in the floodplain and ensure that that program is well funded moving forward. And those restoration sites would then also contribute to our compliance with the National Flood Insurance updated mandates. So quickly, I wanted to just give you a quick update on what our schedule is. As we said, we released the discussion draft last week, and we'll be taking comments through January. We'll have other opportunities for questions and public engagement over that time. We expect that the Army Corps model will be released here in the next month or two. And the expectation is for us is that we will then incorporate the outcome of that model related to the 1996 flood into the next draft, which will go to the Planning and Sustainability Commission, which is called the proposed draft. So right now, the expectation that will be in the spring. Right now, we're tentatively thinking in April for that. And then once we get through the Planning and Sustainability Commission, we then move on to City Council. And that's, we would make updates based on input from the Planning and Sustainability Commission and release a recommended draft. So one of the things that we wanted to help people utilize is the map app. The map app is a website that we use for a lot of our projects to be able to specifically, you can go there and specifically understand the proposals for your specific project. I mean, specific property, excuse me. So I just thought I'd do a little quick demo of how it's used for those who may be a little, seem a little daunting. And then we can get to questions. Okay, so I just wanted to, so this is our map app, and can someone confirm you can see that? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Ellie. So options here, when you start, you come to our map app, you can enter your address and it will, if you want to have a specific address, you put it there and it will go to your specific location. You can also select a property. So in this case, I will choose a property down on the South Waterfront. And so the keys here, when you start, it'll show the combined flood hazard area. That's what this blue hatched layer is. If you go up here, this will tell you what is being shown on the map. And right now it's just the combined flood hazard area. If you go to this second box on the top right, these are all of the layers that we have on the map. And so if you, in this case, for the South Waterfront, we'd be looking at the river overlay zone. So if you click here, it'll tell you where there's a proposed, you can turn on the proposed expansion of the river environmental. You can turn on the riparian buffer area, etc. And this is the existing riparian buffer and existing river environmental. You can see where in the South Waterfront, you can see where the greenway overlay actually is applied. And then an important one is this floodplain area is down at the bottom. So like I said, if you want to look at the high hazard area, you can select that and it will show you exactly where that higher ratio of excavation would be required. And then you can also look at the specifics of where the official 100-year floodplain is and the Title III 1996 flood inundation. In the South Waterfront and in a few other areas in the city, there were areas in the 1996 that were a flood inundation area that were not included in the map. And so we have this just as an informational tool to take a look and see. And so one of those areas where that was not included was in the South Waterfront. So you can also look at that. So other than that, quickly, just over here on the right, this is also very useful. This is all your information about the property. This little summary tells you which things apply to that property and which things don't. So if you see here, that property does not have a high hazard, it doesn't have a riparian buffer. Down at the bottom, it tells you whether your property is proposed for new overlay zones or not. And then depending on what is relevant, you will have a summary of the proposed changes there to the right. So with that, after you dig into the map app, if you still have questions, or even if you just want to go and look at our website and look at the discussion draft, you can find it on our website. We'll also have an opportunity on the website for you to schedule a meeting with us, with staff, to specifically talk about questions or go over, your specific how exactly what the proposals are for a particular property that you're interested in. Feel free to email us or give us a call and we'll get back to you within a few days. And I think with that, we can open it up to any questions. And with that, I will stop the recording. So